In the gilded kingdom of Varelia, nestled between the silver waters of the serene sea and the rolling emerald hills of the verdant expanse, there lived a prince named Kale. Born into unparalleled wealth and splendor, Prince Kale was the only son of King Thorian and Queen Lysandra, rulers of a land that knew no famine, war, or hardship. From birth, Kale had the world beneath his feet, rare jewels, golden chariots, and servants who bowed as low as gravity would allow. Tutors came from distant lands to educate him, bards sang of his good looks, and noble daughters were trained from a young age to please him. But Kale was not interested in statecraft, law, or diplomacy. From the moment he turned 16, his heart, or perhaps more accurately, his passions, were entirely consumed by one pursuit: women. He was a man of breathtaking charm, with hair like spun obsidian and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. His smile could unravel the stiffest of courtiers, and his voice held a softness that made even the most hardened warrior falter. And Kale knew it. Every week a new affair. Every city in the realm knew his name not for bravery or wisdom, but for scandal. He left trails of broken hearts from the noble halls of Eastmarch to the moonlit gardens of Azura's Hold. Courtesans adored him. Daughters of lords fell into fits when he rode past. Even married women, bored of their high-born lives, would sneak out in silken cloaks to rendezvous with the prince under torchlit balconies. He had no shame. In fact, Kale reveled in his reputation. His chambers were lined not only with fine art and exotic wine, but also love letters, perfumed handkerchiefs, and tokens from the countless women he had charmed. His servants joked, always behind closed doors, that he should build a second palace just for his souvenirs of romance. Yet, behind the veil of pleasure, something darker began to stir in Kale's soul. As the years passed, each conquest left him less satisfied. The thrill wore off. The laughter felt hollow. The eyes of the women who adored him began to blur together. He would often wake in the arms of someone whose name he had already forgotten. On the eve of his 25th birthday, a celebration unlike any before was held in Varelia. Hundreds of noble houses gathered. Fireworks kissed the sky, and wine poured like rivers. Amid the festivities, Kale met a young woman named Ceres. She was unlike the others, not because she was more beautiful, though she was, nor because she resisted his charm, though she did, but because she looked at him not with admiration or longing, but with piercing disappointment. "You're the prince," she said with quiet contempt, "but you carry yourself like a spoiled boy playing dress-up in a crown." No woman had ever spoken to him like that. Intrigued, insulted, and captivated, Kale began to pursue her. But Ceres was no courtly flower. She was the daughter of a widowed healer from the northern cliffs, educated, independent, and utterly immune to his games. For months, Kale tried everything: gifts, songs, letters, even a statue carved in her likeness. She rejected them all. He grew angry, then desperate. And finally, he did something he had never done before. He listened. Ceres told him stories of the women he had left behind, some of whom she had met in her travels. One had taken her own life after Kale's rejection. Another had been cast out by her family. A third now lived in exile, hiding her face in shame. Their pain was not gossip, it was real, tangible. Something in Kale broke that night. He spent days locked in his chambers, haunted by faces he could no longer remember but whose suffering echoed through his mind. He began to write letters of apology, hundreds of them, to the women he had used and discarded. Some forgave him. Most did not. But it changed him. Kale withdrew from court life, dedicating himself to the study of philosophy, history, and healing. He traveled in secret across his kingdom, not as a prince but as a servant, helping the sick, building shelters, speaking with the common people. It was not easy. The velvet chains of his old life tugged at him constantly. At night, temptation whispered like an old lover. But each day he woke and chose humility, chose purpose. Years later, when he finally ascended the throne as King Kale of Varelia, the kingdom did not cheer because he was handsome or wealthy or royal. They cheered because he had become a man of depth, of honor, of reflection. and Ceres. She eventually stood at his side, not as a queen, but as a trusted advisor and lifelong friend. She had no interest in crowns. Her heart remained wild and free. Chaol never married. Some say he could not love again, not after Ceres. Others say he finally learned that love was not something to be conquered or possessed, but something to be earned and cherished and respected. The prince who once chased after women left behind a legend. But it was not the one he had imagined in his youth. It was deeper, more complex, a story not of seduction but of redemption. And in that, Chaol found a peace no fleeting pleasure had ever offered. King Chaol ruled Varelia with a wisdom hard-earned and a heart scarred but steady. A decade had passed since he took the crown. His people knew him not as the wayward prince of legend, but as a just ruler, introspective, deeply empathetic, and fiercely protective of the vulnerable. But peace is a fragile thing, even in the most fertile soil. One autumn, as the copper leaves of the king's orchard began to fall, word reached Chaol of a woman found wandering near the southern border, ragged, gaunt, and whispering his name like a prayer or a curse. She was brought to the castle under careful watch, though Chaol insisted no chains be placed on her. When he entered the infirmary and saw her face, he staggered. Her name was Lysina, a duchess's daughter once, and years ago, one of his many mistresses. She had been just 19 when Chaol left her with nothing but a kiss and a broken promise. Now her eyes were wild with anguish. Madness clung to her like a second skin. "She sings about you," the healer whispered to Chaol. "Even in sleep." When Chaol sat beside her bed, she turned to him slowly, her lips cracked, her hands trembling. "You haunt my garden," she said with a sad smile. "Every flower wears your face." She spoke in riddles. She wept. She laughed. And then, in the quietest voice he had ever heard, she said, "You don't even remember what you took from me, do you?" Chaol felt something cold sink into his spine. He remembered Lysina, her fire, her beauty, her poetry. But he had left her as easily as all the others. And in that space she had unraveled. That night, Chaol sat alone in the royal archives, poring over old correspondence, records, and letters he had once ignored. He found a letter Lysina had sent him years ago, unopened, the wax seal unbroken. Inside was a poem, and the news of a child. Son. Chaol felt his heart rip in half. He searched far and wide, tracked every report, questioned travelers, smugglers, even exiles. Slowly, a picture formed. The boy had been born in a remote monastery, raised without name or title, and sent away after Lysina collapsed from grief. The child, now a young man, had vanished into the world, fatherless, nameless, and angry. Chaol could have sent his soldiers. He could have summoned every spy in the realm. But instead he did the unthinkable. He left his palace in the middle of the night, disguised in common robes, and went alone into the wilderness to find the child he never knew. For months he traveled across Varelia. In every village he asked about a boy with eyes like storms and a gift for words. Lysina's son was said to be a poet and a fighter both. In the poor town of Daretha's Hollow, Chaol found a tavern where songs were sung of a masked young man who fought injustice in the streets and vanished before dawn. "Some say he's a prince in exile," an old drunk told Chaol. "Others say he's a ghost with a sword." Eventually, Chaol found him, in a forest clearing beyond the city walls, sparring with a group of young rebels, thieves who called themselves the Ashborn. The boy was tall, lithe, with rage burning in his every movement. Chaol knew at once. He waited until dusk and approached the boy alone, unarmed. The young man turned, sword drawn, mistrust flaring in his eyes. "I'm not here to fight," Chaol said. "Only to answer a question you may not know you're asking." The boy narrowed his eyes. "And what question is that? Why you've always been angry? Why no face ever felt familiar? Why no home ever felt like home?" The sword shook in the boy's hand. "I was your mistake," he spat. Chaol dropped to his knees. "You were never a mistake. Only my greatest failure." Silence stretched between them, taut and trembling. "I didn't know," Chaol said. But that doesn't matter now. What matters is that I came. Not as a king, not as a prince, but as a man begging to know his son. The sword clattered to the ground. The boy, whose name was Aaron, stood there, his chest heaving, his eyes burning. They did not embrace that night. But they did speak, 4 hours, until the stars faded and the forest turned silver with dawn. Aaron told him of hunger, of loss, of the sisters he found in the slums and the battles he fought in alleys when no one cared to listen. Cale told him of mistakes, of regret, of how he'd spent the last decade trying to become a man his son wouldn't be ashamed of. In time, Aaron came to Varelia. Not as a prince, but as a guest. He declined a title, refused a crown, but agreed to stay, to learn, to teach, to rebuild something long broken. Lysina, too, was cared for, in a quiet garden on the palace's western wing. She never fully returned to herself, but some days when Aaron visited, she smiled like the sun rising on a winter morning. And Cale. He ruled with a new light in his eyes, not just of a king, but of a father trying still to atone. The garden he once filled with roses from old lovers was torn down. In its place he planted wildflowers, untamed, chaotic, beautiful, and let them grow freely. For the past is never truly buried. But from it, something honest may yet bloom.